Do you support the arts? Of course you do. Nobody wants to be singled out as a guru, as a boor, as an unrefined, uneducated individual who does not support the arts. We all want to pretend we support the arts, even if we spend absolutely zero of our time, energy, effort, or money in any meaningful sense supporting the arts. Do you think the government should take taxpayers' money and spend it supporting the arts? Do you mean the government paying for public education in the arts so that poverty-stricken children can learn to paint and draw when their parents otherwise wouldn't be able to afford pencils or paper or paint? Do you mean the government spending money so that groups of poverty-stricken school children will be taken to museums that actually have free admission anyway, that their poverty-stricken parents couldn't afford to take? No, don't question it. No debate, no discussion. Do you support government funding? Yes, of course you do. You want to be a refined, sophisticated, urbane intellectual. You don't want to be a boor. You do not want to be an unrefined, retrograde conservative who would dare to question government funding for the arts, not even if it's millions of dollars going into the film industry, not even if it's millions of dollars going down the drain, not even when you read the list of what the government is spending money on for the arts, it seems not just questionable or dubious, but tragic. No. Shut all of that out of your mind. We all support the arts. We all support government funding for the arts. Unless or until it's a statue on your block that you can see out your window. Unless or until it's a statue 2.5 stories tall that is unbelievably ugly, that is in unbelievably poor taste. It's a statue you're going to have to look at every time you open the window of your apartment, every time you walk from your apartment building to the grocery store. Now, all of a sudden, questions about democracy come into very sharp focus. Who decided that this statue should be built here? It's not a matter of money at all. Suddenly, I'd rather pay $10 million more and have some other statue, but not this statue. We didn't have a referendum on this statue. We didn't choose this statue. We don't have direct democracy. And who did choose the statue? Is it someone we elected? No. Someone you elected sat in a council that indirectly appointed someone to hire someone to sit on a board that selected this statue. When you look into it, board by board, statue by statue, there may be several more steps removing the people who made the decision from anyone who was ever elected at any time. And the people who made this decision, the bureaucrats who rule and decide so much in our society. These days, you can probably find some clips of them on YouTube giving a deposition to City Hall or speaking at the Arts Council or maybe even delivering a paper at the university. It may strike you that they're not particularly bright. They're not particularly endowed with any great facility of mind that would allow them to distinguish good taste from bad. It may strike you that these people are, on the whole, rather stupid. And even if they went to art school and got an arts degree, these are not the people who went on to be successful artists. These are the people who, one way or another, went on to become successful bureaucrats who had careers as parasites on the government-funded side of the art world, who didn't get out and innovate. But even if they were innovators, even if these were the most brilliant, fashionable, and edgy of artists, that's really not the purpose of public art. That's not the purpose of monument making. Now, I have to disclose that I have a very particular bias here. My family's fortune comes out of the monument making business, right? I said many cynical things about the making of monuments that influenced my parents. It might be rare to talk about the child influencing the parents. Watch more on my YouTube channel, get to know me, and it'll be easier and easier for you to imagine that I was in some ways a much more powerful influence on my parents than they ever were on me. My parents worked in the museum planning business, but they were involved in public art projects of every kind, which certainly included literal monuments and also included institutions like museums that were created for a commemorative or monumental function. One of my comments that my parents quoted back to me many times, and they quoted between themselves, that really stayed with them, was my simple comment, a monument. Nothing is easier to build, and nothing is more easily ignored. I lived through a period of time in which the Canadian government was not interested in actually helping Cree people, actually helping Ojibwe people, actually helping Dene people. They were interested in erecting monuments. And these monuments are much cheaper than even employing 10 high school teachers, than employing 10 specialists with PhDs in linguistics to study and teach and propound and preserve the Cree language or the Ojibwe language to do something meaningful. If you just do a little rough calculation here, if you employ 10 people who are being paid $100,000 a year, that's $1 million. So you get into multi-million-dollar budgets really quick with real education, with making a real difference in the real world. And yeah, guys, let's not turn the page on history too fast here. First Nations people also deal with very, very simple problems that have multi-million-dollar solutions, like clean drinking water. Do you remember the à-bas-le-ciel crisis? Like water and shelter and, access to education in the most literal physical sense of having a building in which they can receive education. There were problems here with multi-million-dollar solutions pressing. And, there was this thing written called the RCAP, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, this long checklist of exactly what the government was supposed to do to make the situation better. And the government did absolutely zero of the things on that checklist. There are a lot of interesting questions to be asked. But you know what stops people asking questions? Building a monument. Nothing solves the problem of genocide and slavery and colonialism and language extinction like putting up a monument. And these monuments that were made in my generation, I'm 42 years old now, they were neither in a classical European style, nor in any kind of traditional Cree, Ojibwe, Indigenous, First Nation style, right? They put up monuments that were, in vulgar conservative right-wing terms, modern abstract crap. I remember one statue that was made to Louis Riel. If you don't know who Louis Riel is, big deal in Canada, forgotten in the rest of the world. Louis Riel ended up leading a failed rebellion against the government of Canada. He was a highly eccentric religious visionary. He wasn't some proto-Marxist left-wing leader of a poor people's revolution. And his own life in politics was very much actually a hybrid of European and Indigenous culture. He wasn't an example of a kind of untouched, yet to be colonized, intact Indigenous culture. He was an example of a culture that already over centuries had responded to and appropriated elements of European culture, not least of all Christianity. Okay, he was a Christian fanatic who led this uprising. Right? But interesting historical figure, certainly very significant. And there are monuments, including monuments in downtown Toronto that I have seen, celebrating the fact that the British troops, the white troops, the pro-genocide troops, conquered and put down that rebellion and ultimately killed the supporters of Louis Riel. And then during my lifetime, what do? We start putting up statues to instead commemorate as some kind of hero Louis Riel and the leaders of that rebellion. What could be cheaper and what could be more easily ignored? And I remember, I'm thinking of one statue in particular, but I remember one statue, and First Nations people complained. One, this is not in our style, like this isn't our idea of art. Canada's a wide country, but there are many distinctive First Nation styles of statuary and art. I would say it's not like there's just one style. It's not just one style for the Cree. But you could choose to make a statue that is distinctively First Nations in its aesthetics. No. And then on the other hand, this does not look like a statue in France or Berlin to a great historical figure. This does not look like a statue to Masséna in the Place Masséna in France, right? And they said, quite understandably, this is not a statue that white people would accept as a commemoration of a great or famous historical white person. So why do you think this is good enough for us? And they pointed out quite correctly, there was absolutely no resemblance between the statue and the historical figure himself. They didn't, the face, the body, there was no resemblance between these things. It was an expressive, modern, abstract approach, to statuary. So we've been living through a period of time in which real and meaningful political crises have been distracted from by instead indulging in the politics of creating monuments to monumentality. Right? So this is another catchphrase that my parents picked up on and they credited me for. That really was very often when the government creates monuments, they do not symbolize or betoken or communicate anything aside from monumentality itself, except that it is an expression of the government's power to reshape your neighborhood, your public park, your vista, your view out the window, your life, by creating a monument at any place, at any time. And there is no democratic process. There is no vote. There is no consultation with the public. And I want to say this. I had a recent video talking about what were the really distinctive elements of ancient Greek democracy, okay? The ancient Greeks voted on everything, including and especially the arts. When the ancient Greeks went to see a concert, when they went to see a comedy, they were competitive. They regarded theater as a competitive sport, and the audience voted. And that was the basis of their system of trials and of justice. In the same way that the audience sat in judgment over a work of art, the audience sat in judgment at a trial. And I have to say the same thing in an imperfect parallel, talking about Canada's phony democracy, our hollow democracy, our false democracy, is that we have bureaucrats who are in no way democratic, in no way responsive to or responsible to the people they quote unquote represent, right? We have bureaucrats who decide what is art, what is the monument that should be built, right? And we have bureaucrats who decide what is justice, who is innocent, and who is guilty, right? We have a total bureaucratization of what is ultimately a British parliamentary tradition. Right? This is what we are burdened with in Canada. So the problem with public art, I think, reflects a much deeper and much broader problem in our society today. Now, first things last, guys, there is a difference between fashion and style. Okay? Fashion can change every 6 months. Fashion can change every 3 months. And it affects and influences the lives of a small percentage of the population. That small percentage of the population may be very powerful and influential. Cosmopolitan magazine announces that this summer it's gem tones. This is a memory from about 5 years ago. Remember, there was one summer, gem tones. That was it. Cosmopolitan magazine and all those fashion magazines. Get out and buy a new wardrobe because we're wearing gem tones this summer. Okay? What percentage of women actually did it? What percentage of women were influenced by it? What percentage of women read Cosmopolitan magazine unironically to inform them as they go out and buy a new wardrobe, as they go out and buy a new closet full of clothes for what they're going to wear this summer? I don't even believe it's 10% of the population. Like it may be 5%. I know it's not nobody. There's a small percentage of women who live and die by fashion, and fashions change every 6 months, every 3 months. That's fashion, okay? There are new movies in the movie theater every 3 months, every 6 months at most, right? The point of a public monument is not to do something fashionable. It's not to do something edgy. It's not to do something that seems artistically important at this moment, here and now. That is what art for galleries is about, okay? Art in art galleries changes every 3 months. Like movies in the movie theater, there are fashions for new art in art galleries that can change and are written about in magazines. Magazines that, no offense, nobody in this audience reads. How many of you subscribe to the art newspaper? Have you ever heard of the art newspaper? How many of you are actually following the fashions of what's going on in art galleries in Paris, Berlin, Milan? It's not expensive. It's expensive in terms of your time. You can subscribe to the art newspaper today. My parents did. My parents were in the tiny percentage of people who were following what was going on in art galleries at the leading edge, right? Okay. The purpose of public art, the purpose of monuments, is to make a very different kind of artistic statement that, yes, does fade into the background, that, yes, is easily ignored. Stylistically, you are creating something that is going to stand there, not for 6 months and not for 6 years, not for decades, but for centuries. And that is why there is one style of public art, one style of monument that you find in France, whether you are in Paris or in the Côte d'Azur or in Normandy. There is one style of statue that is appropriate for a monument to a mass grave, a mass murder, an atrocity from World War II, and it is equally appropriate to commemorating a great hero or an abstract concept like liberty and the revolution. Throughout France, you see these statues again and again, coast to coast, north to south, east to west. There is one style, and it lasts for centuries. And when people look out their window, or when people walk past it to get their groceries, it is easily ignored. Monuments. Nothing is cheaper, and nothing is more easily ignored.